When you're born, you're pure. Unspoiled and trusting, I believed everything and everyone. Then I met my parents.
You've seen the classics, but what about the shows that fell through the cracks? For every Friends, there was a sitcom that was just as funny, but never found its audience. Let's journey back to find the series that critics loved, but viewers missed. 1. Get a Life 1990 to 1992.
And in the place where you live, now things know. Think about direction, wonder why.
Let's start with one of the strangest shows to ever air on TV. Remember Chris Elliott, the goofy, kind of awkward guy from Late Night with David Letterman? Well, he got his own show, and it was bonkers in the best way possible. The show was about a 30-year-old man named Chris Peterson who still lived with his parents and worked as a paperboy. That's it. That's the plot. He wasn't trying to become a rock star or an actor. He was perfectly happy riding his bike and throwing newspapers. He was a man-child before that was even a common term. His parents, played by his real-life dad, Bob Elliott and Eleanor Donahue, were always so tired of his nonsense. Get a Life was not like other sitcoms. It didn't have heartwarming family moments or lessons learned. Instead, it was completely surreal and weird. In one episode, Chris gets a pet alien creature. In another, he gets taken over by a handsome parasite. This show was famous for eliminating Chris at the end of many episodes. He gets stomped on by a giant monster. He explodes. He falls out of a plane. You name it. Of course, he would be perfectly fine by the start of the next episode, no questions asked. It was a live-action cartoon. It was probably way too strange for most people in the early 90s. Audiences were used to shows like Full House and The Cosby Show. A show where the main character dies in outrageous ways, like getting crushed by a giant foot or exploding, was just too wild for mainstream viewers. It was on Fox, a network known for taking risks, but even for them, this was out there. It only lasted 2 seasons, but it became a cult favorite for fans of bizarre, boundary-pushing comedy. Without Get a Life, we might not have gotten later shows that were just as weird and funny, like Community or Rick and Morty. It showed that a sitcom could be anything it wanted to be, even if it meant being a little crazy. 2. Herman's Head, 1991 to 1994.
Something's wrong. We're not working.
You mean we're not?
No, we're not.
Okay, stick with me on this one. The idea for this show sounds like it came from a very weird dream, but it totally worked. Imagine if the movie Inside Out was a sitcom made 20 years earlier for adults. That was Herman's Head. The show was about a young writer named Herman Brooks who worked at a magazine publishing company. He was a pretty normal guy, dealing with his boss, his friends, and trying to date. But the most interesting part of the show happened inside his brain. 4 different characters living in a big attic-like room represented the different parts of his personality. There was Angel, his sensitive side, Animal, his lustful side, Wimp, his anxiety, and Genius, his logic. Whenever Herman had to make a decision, these 4 would argue and fight to control what he would do. It was such a clever idea. You got to see why a character was making his choices. When he tried to talk to a girl at a bar, you'd see Animal screaming, "Go for it!" while Wimp was hiding under a table in fear. The actors playing the parts of his personality were fantastic. Ken Hudson Campbell played Animal, bringing hilarious energy to Herman's lustful side, while Hank Azaria shone as Jay, Herman's snarky coworker. The show was a fun and really creative way to look at the simple problems we all face every day. The show was popular enough to last 3 seasons, but it never became a huge success. Some people thought the concept was a little too silly. It was also on the Fox network, which in the early 90s was still trying to find its footing. It got moved around to different nights and times, which is often the kiss of death for a TV show. People couldn't find it, so they stopped watching. Herman's Head was a high-concept show that was way ahead of its time. It took a big, weird idea and made it into a funny and relatable sitcom. It's a perfect example of a show that deserves to be remembered for its creativity. 3. Wings, 1990 to 1997.
Here for messing with my girlfriend.
Hey, buddy, that's my brother.
You want some of this too?
But over the years, we've drifted apart, so it's not...
Wait a minute, you might be thinking. Wings wasn't forgotten. It was on for 7 years. And you're right, it was a hit. But think about it. When was the last time you heard someone talk about Wings? It's the definition of a show that was popular in its time, but has been almost completely overshadowed by the shows it was connected to. Wings was about two brothers, Joe and Brian Hackett, who ran a tiny one-plane airline on the island of Nantucket, Massachusetts. Joe was the serious, responsible brother, and Brian was the fun-loving, irresponsible one. They worked alongside their childhood friend, Helen, who ran the airport lunch counter but dreamed of playing the cello in a big orchestra. The show was filled out by a cast of wacky characters, including a goofy mechanic named Lowell, a grumpy rival airline owner named Roy, and an overly dramatic ticket agent named Fay. Wings came from the same creative minds behind Cheers, and it had that same cozy ensemble vibe. It was a classic workplace comedy where a group of very different people become a sort of family. Thomas Hayden Church, who played the clueless mechanic Lowell Mather, was a standout star. Every line he said was comedy gold. The show was consistently funny, with smart writing and lovable characters. Plus, it had fun crossover episodes with Cheers. Frasier, Norm, and Cliff all popped up on Nantucket at one point. You see, Wings had the bad luck of existing alongside giants. While it wasn't a direct spin-off, it shared Cheers' producers and warm comedic style, so it was often compared to that iconic show. Meanwhile, Cheers spawned Frasier, another all-time great sitcom. Wings was very good, but it wasn't legendary like its contemporaries. Wings is like your favorite comfortable sweater. It's not flashy, but it's warm, reliable, and always makes you feel good. It's a solid, funny show that deserves another look. 4. The Critic 1994 to 1995.
It stinks.
Let's move from live action to animation. In the 90s, after the massive success of The Simpsons, every network wanted its own hit cartoon for adults. Most of them were terrible, but one of them, The Critic, was pure genius. The show was about a New York film critic named Jay Sherman, voiced by John Lovitz. Jay hosted a movie review show on TV where he rated movies with his iconic catchphrase, "It stinks." He was snobby, a little bit sad, and hopelessly single. He loved old classic black and white films, but was forced to review terrible blockbuster movies like Home Alone 5 and a musical about President Gerald Ford. The show made fun of Hollywood and all the silly movies that came out. The parodies were amazing. Every episode was packed with hilarious fake movie clips that made fun of popular films of the time. They did spoofs of Forrest Gump, The Lion King, Pulp Fiction, you name it. The writing was super sharp and funny, brought to you by two former writers from The Simpsons, Al Jean and Mike Rice. John Lovitz was perfect as Jay Sherman, making him a character you could laugh at, but also feel a little sorry for. This is a sad story of a great show that just couldn't find an audience. It first aired on ABC, right after the hugely popular show Home Improvement. But the viewers of that family-friendly sitcom didn't stick around for a cartoon about a sarcastic film critic. It was canceled. Then, in a rare move, the Fox network picked it up for a second season, hoping it would be a good partner for The Simpsons. But it still didn't catch on. It was canceled again. It was a show that critics loved, but regular folks just didn't tune in. The Critic was too smart and too niche for its own good. But if you love movies and sharp, fast-paced comedy, you need to find this show. It absolutely holds up. Hachi Machi, 5. News Radio 1995 to 1999.
Oh, they say that cat Shaft is one bad mother.
Shut up, you guys.
What's going on?
We're just talking about Shaft.
This is one of those shows that comedy nerds absolutely love, and for good reason. On the surface, News Radio looked like a standard workplace sitcom, but it was one of the most cleverly written and perfectly acted shows of its era. The show took place at WNYX, a fictional AM news radio station in New York City. It followed the daily lives of the staff, from the well-meaning but often overwhelmed news director Dave Nelson, played by Dave Foley, to the egotistical anchors Bill McNeil, Phil Hartman, and Catherine Duke, Condi Alexander. The cast also included Maura Tierney as the smart and sarcastic producer Lisa Miller, Stephen Root as the eccentric billionaire owner Jimmy James, and Andy Dick as the clumsy reporter Matthew Brock. The cast was everything. Every single actor was a comedy genius. The real star, however, was the legendary Phil Hartman. As Bill McNeil, he was arrogant, insecure, and ridiculously funny. He could get a huge laugh just by the way he said a word. The show's humor was fast, witty, and often completely absurd. One famous episode took place entirely on a stalled subway car. Another was set in outer space. The show didn't take itself too seriously and was always willing to be silly. News Radio was a victim of two things: bad scheduling and a real-life tragedy. NBC, the network it was on, moved the show's time slot over 10 times in its first 3 seasons. A show can't build a loyal audience if people don't know when it's on. But the biggest blow came in 1998 when Phil Hartman was tragically eliminated. He was the heart of the show. They tried to continue for one more season with John Lovitz, a good friend of Hartman's, joining the cast, but it just wasn't the same. The magic was gone and the show was canceled. For many, News Radio is one of the great what-if stories of television. What if it had gotten a stable time slot? What if Phil Hartman had lived? We'll never know, but we can still enjoy the 5 brilliant seasons they made, even if the final one struggled without Hartman's magic. 6. Dinosaurs, 1991 to 1994.
As you know, the end of the world is upon us, and that means... You say big! Values galore here at Discount Charlie's!
Not the mama. You probably remember that catchphrase, but do you remember the show it came from? Dinosaurs was a sitcom about a family of, well, dinosaurs, but it was so much more than just a gimmick. The show was basically a classic family sitcom like The Flintstones or Roseanne, but with puppets. It was about the Sinclair family: Earl, the dad who worked pushing over trees; Fran, the stay-at-home mom; their teenage kids, Robbie and Charlene; and of course, baby Sinclair, the tiny frying-pan-wielding terror. They lived in a version of the prehistoric world that looked a lot like modern suburbia. They had TVs, refrigerators, and all the same problems as a regular human family. The puppets, created by Jim Henson's Creature Shop, were incredible. They were expressive and felt totally alive. But the real genius of the show was its writing. It looked like a kids' show, but it tackled some really heavy topics. It talked about environmentalism. The dad's job was literally destroying the planet, workers' rights, and corporate greed. The company Earl worked for was called We Say So Corporation, run by a ruthless Tyrannosaurus Rex. The show was a clever satire of modern society, disguised as a family comedy with puppets. The show was pretty popular for a while, especially with families. But like a lot of high-concept shows, the novelty started to wear off after a few years. It was also very expensive to make, and when viewership started to dip, the network decided to pull the plug. But the way it ended is what makes it truly unforgettable. In the series finale, Earl's company accidentally causes the Ice Age, and the entire family freezes to death while waiting for the end of the world. Yes, you read that right. A family sitcom ended with the main characters dying in a global catastrophe. It's one of the darkest and bravest endings in TV history. Dinosaurs were so much smarter than they had any right to be. It drew you in with cute puppets and a funny baby, and then it hit you with powerful messages about our world. 7. Ned and Stacy, 1995 to 1997.
So you sure everything's all right? There's no hard feelings about anything?
No.
The 90s were full of sitcoms about single people in the big city. But Ned and Stacy took a common movie plot and turned it into a weekly show with two fantastic lead actors who had amazing chemistry. Ned Dorsey, played by Thomas Hayden Church, who we already know from Wings, was an ambitious, self-centered advertising executive. To get a big promotion, he needed to be seen as a stable family man. Stacey Colbert, played by Deborah Messing, before she became famous on Will and Grace, was a journalist who desperately wanted to move out of her parents' house. So, they make a deal. They get married and live together as husband and wife in name only. He gets his promotion. She gets a beautiful apartment. The only rule? They can't stand each other. The chemistry between Thomas Hayden Church and Deborah Messing was electric. They were masters of the fast-talking, witty argument. Their insults to each other were so sharp and funny, you couldn't help but laugh. Ned was arrogant, but somehow still likable, and Stacy was smart and fiery. You knew from the first episode that even though they claimed to hate each other, they were perfect for each other. It was a classic will they or won't they setup, but it felt fresh because of the clever writing and brilliant performances. The show only lasted for 2 seasons. It was another case of a show that critics liked, but that struggled to find a big audience. It was probably a little too cynical for some viewers who preferred their sitcom couples to be sweet and loving from the start. After it was canceled, its stars went on to bigger things. Deborah Messing became a household name on Will and Grace, and Thomas Hayden Church became a respected movie actor, even getting an Oscar nomination for the film Sideways. Ned and Stacy is a forgotten gem of 90s comedy. If you like sharp, fast-paced dialogue and classic romantic comedy setups, this show is a must-watch. 8. Titus 2000 to 2002.
The Los Angeles Times states 63% of American families are now considered dysfunctional. That means we're the majority.
Most family sitcoms are warm and fuzzy. They're about loving parents who always know the right thing to say. Titus was the exact opposite of that, and that's what made it so brilliant and so different. The show was based on the real life and stand-up comedy of its star, Christopher Titus. It was about his incredibly dysfunctional family. His character, also named Christopher Titus, ran a custom car shop. His dad, Ken Titus, was a hard-drinking, multiple divorce, and emotionally abusive man who believed that parenting is a dirty job, but someone has to screw it up. The show also featured his sweet but dim-witted brother Dave and his smart, loving girlfriend Erin, who was the one normal person in a sea of chaos. Titus was dark, but it was also hysterically funny. It tackled subjects that most sitcoms wouldn't dare to touch, like alcoholism, mental illness, and family trauma. But it did so with humor. The show had a unique style. It would often cut away to a black and white neutral space where Titus would talk directly to the audience, explaining the crazy logic behind his family's actions. The relationship between Titus and his father was the core of the show. John Philbin, who played Ken Titus, was terrifying and hilarious at the same time. You could see that under all the terrible advice and drinking, he did love his son in his own very twisted way. The show was simply too dark for the network. It was on Fox, which was known for edgy shows, but there were constant battles between Christopher Titus and the network executives over the show's content. They wanted him to make it lighter and more like a traditional sitcom. He refused. After 3 successful seasons, a new executive took over the network, didn't like the show, and canceled it without warning. Titus was a brave, honest, and groundbreaking sitcom. It showed that comedy could come from dark places and that family isn't always perfect. It's a show that was ahead of its time and has a huge cult following to this day. 9. The Tick Live Action 2001.
I have only been in the city for 24 hours. I've already got a secret headquarters and a sidekick who flies
Before Marvel movies took over the world, superhero stories were often seen as goofy and silly. The Tick leaned into that silliness and created one of the funniest, most quotable superhero parodies of all time. We're talking about the short-lived live-action version from 2001. The Tick, played by the amazing Patrick Warburton, was a giant, muscular superhero in a bright blue suit with antennae that wiggled when he was excited. He was incredibly strong and nearly impossible to hurt, but he was also completely clueless. He would shout dramatic, nonsensical things like "spoon" before jumping into a fight. His sidekick was Arthur, a former accountant who dressed up as a moth. Together with other B-list heroes like Captain Liberty and Batmanuel, they protected the city from equally ridiculous villains. Patrick Warburton was born to play this role. His deep, serious voice delivering the most absurd lines was comedy perfection. The show was a loving poke at all the classic superhero tropes. It wasn't mean-spirited, it was just plain funny. The world it created was full of color and imagination. The villains were as silly as the heroes, with names like the Terror and the Evil Midnight Bomber. What bombs at midnight? It aired on Fox and was canceled after only 9 episodes. Why? The reasons are still debated by fans. Some say it was too expensive to produce. Others say the network just didn't get it and didn't promote it properly. It was put on at a bad time and not enough people saw it. It was a classic case of a network having a brilliant, unique show on its hands and having no idea what to do with it. The fan outrage over its cancellation was huge, but it wasn't enough to save it. The Tick was pure, joyful, comic book fun. It was a show that was too beautiful and too weird for this world. Luckily, it's become a massive cult classic, and you can still watch the handful of perfect episodes that were made. 10. Andy Richter Controls the Universe, 2002 to 2003.
It's great being a writer. Whenever things get boring, I can go wherever I want. Like right now, I'm hard at work on the manual for the Sawbridge Amphibious Personnel Vehicle.
After leaving his job as Conan O'Brien's sidekick, the very funny Andy Richter got his own sitcom. And it wasn't just any sitcom, it was a surreal, imaginative, and hilarious show that broke all the rules of a typical workplace comedy. Andy played Andy Richter, an aspiring writer living in Chicago who worked for a company that made technical manuals for machines you've never heard of. The show followed his work life, his friendships, and his dating woes. But here's the twist. We often got to see his daydreams and fantasy scenarios played out on screen. If he was bored in a meeting, we might see him imagine himself as a rock star. If he was nervous about asking someone out, we'd see a fantasy of how it could go terribly wrong. The fantasy sequences were the heart of the show. They were clever, funny, and gave a unique insight into the character's mind. The show was quirky and smart, with a fantastic cast that included a young Paget Brewster from Criminal Minds. It had the same kind of offbeat humor as shows like Scrubs, but it came out a little before and never got the same attention. The writing was sharp, and Andy Richter was a perfect lead, playing the lovable everyman stuck in a boring job with a wild imagination. You can probably guess the story by now. It was a critical darling, reviewers loved it and called it one of the best new comedies. But it struggled in the ratings. Fox aired the episodes out of order, making it hard to follow the character relationships, and then canceled it before all the episodes had even been shown. It was yet another victim of a network not knowing how to handle a show that was a little different from the norm. Andy Richter Controls the Universe is a perfect example of a show that would have been a huge hit if it came out just a few years later. In today's world of binge-watching, a smart, quirky show like this would have found its audience online. 11. Undeclared 2001 to 2002.
I hate that guy.
Whatever, he's a nice guy.
He's not a nice guy. You are a nice guy for calling that idiot a nice guy.
Judd Apatow is now one of the biggest names in comedy, known for movies like The 40-Year-Old Virgin and Knocked Up. But before all that, he created two of the most beloved and realistic TV shows about being young. Freaks and Geeks and its college follow-up, Undeclared. While Freaks and Geeks has become a legendary cult classic, its successor is often forgotten. Undeclared was about a group of college freshmen navigating their first year at the fictional University of Northeastern California. The main character was Stephen Karp, a skinny, kind of dorky guy who is suddenly cool for the first time in his life. The show explored everything about freshman year, the awkward dorm parties, the confusion of picking a major, the first real relationships, and the freedom of being away from your parents for the first time. It felt real. Unlike other shows about college that were full of drama and perfect-looking actors, Undeclared felt like actual college. The characters were awkward, made mistakes, and talked like real people. The cast was incredible and featured a bunch of young actors who would go on to become huge stars, including Seth Rogen, Jay Baruchel, and Charlie Hunnam. It was funny, heartfelt, and perfectly captured that weird, exciting time in your life. It was on Fox, and it suffered the same fate as many other great shows on this list. The network didn't seem to have faith in it. They aired the episodes out of order and frequently changed its time slot. Judd Apatow has said in interviews that he was in a constant fight with the network over the show's direction. Despite getting great reviews, it was canceled after just one season. Undeclared is the perfect companion piece to Freaks and Geeks. It's a funny, sweet, and honest look at a time of life that's full of change. It's a shame we only got 1 year with these characters. 12. Grounded for Life 2001 to 2005.
What do you think?
I think I should have married a rock star.
You already did.
Here's a show that was a solid, funny family sitcom that actually lasted for 5 seasons, but you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who remembers it clearly. It got shuffled around so much that it's a miracle it lasted as long as it did. The show was about the Finnerty family, an Irish Catholic family living in Staten Island, New York. Sean and Claudia Finnerty had gotten pregnant and married when they were just 18, so they were still young and cool while trying to raise their 3 kids, including a teenage daughter. This made for a fun dynamic where the parents were often just as immature as their children. The show's unique trick was that it used flashbacks. Each episode would start with a problem in the present, and then it would flash back to an earlier time to show how the problem started. Donna Logue and Megan Price, who played the parents, were fantastic. They felt like a real couple. They loved each other, but they also drove each other crazy. The show had a very real, blue-collar feel, similar to Roseanne. The writing was funny and relatable. The flashback structure wasn't just a gimmick, it was a clever way to tell a story and add extra jokes. You got to see the funny and embarrassing moments that led up to the present-day chaos. This show had a rough ride. It started on the Fox network, where it did okay, but was never a huge priority. After 2 seasons, Fox canceled it. But then, in a very rare move, another network, the WB, which later became the CW, picked it up and made 3 more seasons. Moving networks is tough for a show. A lot of viewers get lost along the way. Even though it had a loyal fan base, it never became a mainstream hit and just faded away after it ended. Grounded for Life was a really solid and funny show that deserved better. It was a classic family sitcom with a clever twist that set it apart from the rest. 13. Better Off Ted, 2009 to 2010.
I have the best job in the world.
We want to make a metal that's as hard as steel but can bounce like rubber.
If you ask TV critics to name a show that was canceled way too soon, Better Off Ted is almost always at the top of the list. It was a razor-sharp satire of corporate life that was so smart and so funny, it's a crime it only lasted 2 seasons. The show was about Ted Crisp, a good-hearted executive at Viridian Dynamics, a massive, soulless, and hilariously evil corporation. Viridian Dynamics made everything from uncomfortable office chairs to weaponized pumpkins. Ted's job was to manage his team, which included his tough-as-nails boss, Veronica, and the scientists Lem and Phil, who were always inventing morally questionable things like meat grown in a lab that was probably beef. Ted would often break the fourth wall, talking directly to the camera to comment on the absurdity of his workplace. It was brilliantly written. The jokes were smart, fast, and relentless. The show made fun of everything about office culture, the pointless meetings, the corporate buzzwords, the lack of morality. The fake commercials for Viridian Dynamics that opened each show were comedy genius Viridian Dynamics. We're the future of food. For some reason, Portia de Rossi was incredible as Veronica, the cold and calculating boss who had no emotions but delivered the funniest lines with a straight face. It was a show that was almost universally loved by critics, but nobody watched it. The network, ABC, seemed to have no idea how to promote it. It was too smart and too cynical for a mainstream audience that was used to more traditional sitcoms. The ratings were terrible from the very beginning, and it was canceled after just 26 episodes. Better Off Ted is a perfect sitcom. There isn't a single bad episode. It's one of the sharpest, funniest, and most original comedies ever made. It's the ultimate example of a show that was just too good for television. 14. Happy Endings. 2011 to 2013.
Alex, I love you!
What's happening here?
I skipped the rehearsal, but I'm pretty sure that guy's in love with Alex.
Imagine a version of Friends where everyone is the funny one, the jokes fly a mile a minute, and the plot doesn't really matter. That was Happy Endings, a show that took a simple premise and turned it into one of the most energetic and hilarious sitcoms of the 2010s. The show starts at a wedding. Alex leaves her fiancé, Dave, at the altar. This makes things very awkward for their group of 4 friends who have to figure out how to stay friends with both of them. That premise was basically forgotten after the first few episodes. The show quickly became about the insane, rapid-fire banter between the 6 friends: career-obsessed Jane, her goofy husband Brad, unlucky-in-love Penny, slacker Max, and the former couple, Dave and Alex. The chemistry of the cast was off the charts. They felt like a real group of friends who had known each other forever. The jokes were incredibly dense. If you blinked, you'd miss 3 of them. The show was full of running gags, pop culture references, and hilarious physical comedy. It wasn't about the will they or won't they of Dave and Alex. It was about the joy of just hanging out with this group of hilarious weirdos. Adam Pally and Casey Wilson as Max and Penny were particular standouts, creating 2 of the funniest sitcom characters of the modern era. ABC, the network that aired it, just couldn't figure out what to do with it. They moved it all over their schedule: Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Fridays. They burned off the final episodes by airing 2 a week. It had a small but incredibly passionate fan base that fought hard to save it, but the ratings were never strong enough for the network. It was canceled after 3 seasons, leading to a huge outcry from fans and critics. Happy Endings was lightning in a bottle. It's a show that makes you happy just by watching it. It's pure comedic joy from start to finish and the definition of gone too soon. 15. The Ben Stiller Show, 1992 to 1993.
Hi, I'm Ben Stiller. Welcome to the show. I guess you're wondering who I am and what the show's about.
Sometimes a show isn't remembered for its ratings or how long it was on the air, but for the incredible talent it brought together. The Ben Stiller Show was a bomb in its time, but it has become legendary as the place where a whole generation of comedy superstars got their start. This wasn't a traditional sitcom, but a sketch comedy show like a much weirder 90s version of Saturday Night Live. It was created by and starred a young Ben Stiller. The show was all about parodying pop culture. They did hilarious sketches making fun of U2, Cape Fear, cops, and 90s celebrities like Tom Cruise and Bruce Springsteen. The talent involved was insane. The main cast was Ben Stiller, Andy Dick, Janine Garofalo, and Bob Odenkirk, yes, Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. The head writer and co-creator was Judd Apatow. Think about that. That's a Mount Rushmore of modern comedy, all working together on one show before any of them were famous. The sketches were smart, edgy, and often surreal. They were doing things that were years ahead of their time. It aired on Fox and was canceled after only 12 episodes due to terrible ratings. It was just too different for a mainstream audience. But here's the crazy part. After it was canceled, the show won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Writing. It's one of the only shows in history to be canceled and then win a major Emmy. It proved that the industry recognized its brilliance, even if viewers didn't. The Ben Stiller Show is more than just a forgotten show. It's a piece of comedy history. It was a creative playground for a group of geniuses who would go on to define comedy for the next 20 years. Watching it now is like looking at a yearbook for comedy royalty. It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest failures can lead to the greatest successes.